Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the History by the Lake. This afternoon, we're joined by Mike and Lisa Harris for a conversation about one of Greenville's longest-running family stories. Harris Drug Store began in 1896, but this is not just the story of a drugstore. It is the story of a family, a downtown, a community, and 130 years of showing up for Greenville. To start, I want to give us a simple way to think about the story. But also, to start, I have to tell you, we're filming this. And we're hoping to film all of these presentations and be able to put them online like within a week, okay? So, let's get going. Harris Drug Store is the anchor of the story, but it's not the whole story. Over the years, the Harris family became part of Greenville through pharmacy service, the soda fountain, Frosteeland, the corner shop, sports, civic life, downtown business, and simply being there for people year after year. So the way we're going to follow the story is through the family line first. Isaac and Nora Harris, then Wilbur and Ida, then Gussie and Carol, and finally with Mike and Lisa. So once we understand the people, the store, and the community story will make more sense. But before we go back to 1896, I want to begin with a simple memory question. Mike and Lisa, before we go all the way back to the beginning, I want to start with what the place means to your own memory. When you picture Harris Drug Store, what do you see first?
All right. To me, it's where I grew up. I would stop on my way back from school, see my father, and watch him work, and hopefully be able to get an ice cream. At that time, they had hot peanuts down front, and I would stick my hand and grab handfuls of those. And as I grew older, my grandmother would stop and see her, and she would babysit us, and during the summer, we'd hang out in the dairy bar. So the girls in the dairy bar became my babysitters a lot of times.
To me, it's location, location, location. I just think about where the store is now, or it's been for so long. Each morning, when I go in to come there first to open up and unlock that door. And I turn around and there's a view of the lake. And I think, wow, that's so cool. My grandparents and my great-grandparents, that was their view for all these years.
Nice, thank you. That's a really good place to begin, because for many people, Harris Drug Store is not just a name or a state, it's a place they remember. The Harris story in Greenville begins in 1896 when Isaac Augustus Harris came to town and bought the pharmacy business from Dr. Hiram Hunt. He and his wife Nora would raise their family here, and over time the drugstore became tied not just to Isaac's work, but to the life of the whole Harris family. Greenville was a very different place then. The railroad was still relatively new, the town was growing, and a pharmacist played an important role in everyday life. But Isaac was not only starting a business, he was beginning what became a family responsibility. Mike and Lisa, what stories have been passed down about Isaac Harris in the early drugstore?
I'm just starting the business, feeling the need in the community, to be there for the community, to stay there, help, and be part of that community, help that community grow.
What I know about Isaac, I learned primarily from a family history that was done by one of my dad's cousins, Wilbur Marsh, and also from my great-grandfather's obituary. And, I learned he went to Mass College of Pharmacy, which is where my dad went, and my brother went, which is now Northeastern, but went to the same school. And I know that he was president of his class at Agricultural University. And I wonder what brought, or what, how Hiram Hunt got him to come to Greenville, and, take over the pharmacy that he had started. And in his obituary, it says he performed an invaluable service, and he did so with kindness, and he was very charitable.
Thank you. So that helps us see Isaac, not just as the name at the beginning of the story, but as a real person who set a standard for the family. And that family part of the story matters, because the store soon became tied to the home life as well as business life. Isaac and Nora raised their family here in Greenville, and the drugstore became part of that family life. One of the articles found included memories from Mary Harris Workman, one of Isaac's daughters. Those memories remind us that this was not just a storefront, it was a household, a family, and a responsibility. In a family business, work and home are often tied together. What have you heard about what it was like to grow up in the early Harris family?
I'm sure they all had to pitch in somehow and make the business successful and share in that, but I'm sure they all had to make sacrifices because of the work and not be able to, but that was their family and that's the way that they thought of it, and that was all part of that.
Nora and Isaac had 8 children, right? Did they all work in the drugstore, do you think?
Sure, they all helped out at some point or did something we needed.
Sure.
Yeah.
Lisa, anything to add?
I would just add that part of Mary's memories that I read about, she said that the store was open all hours to accommodate people who got sick, and sickness doesn't come on schedule. So when you need a pharmacist to help you out, my great-grandfather did that.
Thank you. Well, that gives us a better sense of how the business became part of the family's daily life, not just something separate from it. One of Isaac and Nora's children was Wilbur Harris, known as Gus. He becomes the next generation in the drugstore, and his story reaches far beyond the counter. Wilbur was born in 1903, so he grew up with the drugstore as part of his life. By the late 1920s, he appears to have been working with his father, and his obituary later said he had owned the drugstore for about 30 years before his death in 1961. So that takes us back to about 1931. So this was not a sudden handoff from Isaac to Wilbur. Like many family businesses, the second generation seems to have come in gradually. Wilbur was married to Ida Bell Guilford in 1935. And they had 2 children, Arlene and Harold. Harold was the one most people in Greenville would come to know as Gussie. Wilbur helped carry Harris Drugstore into the next generation, but his story did not stay only behind the counter. He became one of those people whose life touched many parts of the community. So Mike and Lisa, what stories have been passed down about Wilbur Harris as part of the family in the drugstore?
Well, what I was taught most, or stories about most, was his coaching in baseball and his love of baseball, and helping the younger kids in sports. And that's what he enjoyed doing. He enjoyed hunting and fishing and all the outdoors when he wasn't working. That's what I was told about.
I understood he liked baseball so much that in the late 40s after the war, he wasn't only the manager, but he would pay players to come play at Greenville, because back then it was almost like a semi-pro league. Is that right?
I believe so. I don't know about the paying part, but I know that he did manage and coached. And it was a big part of his life, yes.
Interesting. Lisa?
When I think about my grandfather, I think about him coming into the pharmacy business in the context of the Great Depression, because it was 1931. And And so I wonder I'm not sure what his intentions were when he was growing up, if he thought he was going to go into pharmacy like his dad did. But that because of what was going on in the world, coming back to Greenville and stepping into the pharmacy business was probably a good idea at the time. But I don't know for sure.
That helps us understand Wilbur first as a family member and a pharmacist before we look at the large role he played in town. Because outside the store, Wilbur became one of Greenville's best-known public figures. There was a sports writer named Owen Osborne who wrote for the Portland Press Herald, and he called Wilbur Harris Mr. Greenville after Wilbur's death. And the more we look at the record, the more that phrase makes sense. Wilbur was involved in sports, town affairs, state politics, and community life. He served in the Maine legislature, was active locally, and was especially remembered for his love of baseball and athletics. Mike and Lisa, what do you think people admired Wilbur so much?
That he was there for the community, and he cared about the community, and he'd do whatever he needed to do for the community. If someone needed help, he would whatever he could, and that's the way he wanted it to be, and that's the way it was going to be as far as he was concerned.
So I would say I agree with his dedication to the community, and he was again very charitable. And I had this one customer came into the store, I think it was a couple of years ago. I don't know what his name was, but I happened to be working that day in the drugstore, and he said, "Your grandfather, I'll never forget it. He had a TV and my family did not. He told me I could come over and watch the baseball games." And he was just, thought that was the coolest thing. And I was like, that was absolutely full of it. So I've just heard little stories like that about, how my grandfather was just enjoyed people.
Well, that gives us a good picture of why people remember him. It's more than just a businessman. He seems to have belonged to the whole community. But baseball keeps coming up, and there's one story that captures that side of him especially well. So, and this is one of my favorite ones. Ted Williams had been on a fishing trip to northern Maine. It was up to Ross Lake, and bad weather delayed the return, and the party got only as far as Greenville. They needed a ride to Bangor. So Owen Osborne, the sports writer, called Gus Harris, and Gus came right over. All the way to Bangor, Gus had the chance to ask Ted Williams about baseball questions. Yes. So did this story get told in the family, and does it sound like the Wilbur Harris your family heard about?
It sure does. My father did mention it. The most I learned about it mostly was reading the article in the paper. But that did happen, and my father went and got this ball signed by Ted Williams. And that was, I believe it was signed over at Northland's Restaurant, which is now on the M's. That my father went over, and they really didn't want him to hang around, but they said, "You can go do that." And that's when he went and got that ball. And that's the story that had been told.
It says, to Harold from Ted Williams, July 1947.
Amazing. That's such a treasure to us. So this is a wonderful story, partly because it is about Ted Williams, but really it's about Wilbur, his love of baseball, his willingness to help, and the kind of connections he had. So the next major turn in the family story came in 1961. That year, the Harris family and the Greenville community suffered a sudden loss when Wilbur died in a fishing accident on Lower Wilson Pond. The newspaper coverage makes clear that the loss was felt far beyond the family. He had been a pharmacist, a legislator, a sportsman, a civic leader, and a friend to many. Mike and Lisa, He was also Ida's husband and Gussie's father, and his death changed the future of the family business. Mike and Lisa, what stories did you hear about the impact of Wilbur's death on the family and the business?
That it was just a loss to the community. And at that time, my father was just graduating school. So how was that all going to work if he was not completely a pharmacist yet? And I'm not sure exactly how that transition went between the time he actually graduated, got his license, and how that all filled in and stuff. But I'm sure, all those problems that came up and how that was all going to be navigated and worked around. And of course, the loss to family as the father and stuff like that.
I bet it affected the whole community. Lisa, did you have anything?
I think about the grit of my grandmother, to suffer that loss. And like Michael said, my father is not yet finished becoming a pharmacist, but I think she knew if she could just keep it going, that my dad would come back to step in, and she did.
That's a great segue. So that helps us understand this is more than a public loss. It was a family loss, and it left the future of the store in a very different place. And that brings us to Ida. After Wilbur's death, Ida became one of the most important people in the story. Her obituary says that after her husband's death, she was a partner with her son Gussie, and together they operated Harris Drugstore. That is not a small detail. Ida helped hold the business and the family together at a time when the future could have gone in a very different direction. Mike and Lisa, what role did Ida play in keeping the business and the family going after Wilbur passed?
I'm sure she took over a lot of the day-to-day business part of it, making sure that things were running, what needed to be done, and stuff like that until my father got back and got more into the business himself. And then they kind of did it together.
Yeah, I don't think you've shown the image yet of both my dad and my grandmother together working in pharmacy side by side. And, my grandmother was always there. She lived upstairs, and she needed to survive. And so like I said, she kept it going.
I loved Ida. I can tell you, she loved the Red Sox as much as Wilbur did. And I would go into the Sunday. I would go in every Sunday to get the Boston Globe to read about the Red Sox. And I would sit on a stool and talk to Ida about them until my mother said it's time to go. And she was a special woman. And so that gives Ida the place she deserves in the story. She was part of the bridge between Wilbur's generation and his son Gussie. And then just 2 years later, the family faced another major test. On December 27th, 1963, another major setback came. Fire destroyed the old Harris Drugstore. For a small town family business, especially one that had just gone through a sudden loss, that could have been the end of the story. Mike and Lisa, so what stories were passed down about this fire?
I was told that at the time, which was, I guess, December 27th or something like that, they were up to Rolling Workman's playing cards. And my grandmother had called and said that this drugstore was on fire. And of course, they all rushed out. And of course, they had burned to the ground at that point. I'm not exactly sure how it got what he did between that time or where he was working, filling prescriptions or whatever he needed to do until the store got rebuilt.
I understand they worked out of the insurance building. I'm not sure.
That's right, they did.
Yeah, until they could get the new store built. Yeah, and I just remember hearing about the fire from my mother, and just how devastating it was. And they were newlyweds. My mom and dad were newlyweds. Just a few months maybe, and then the fire. So it was quite a, something to overcome and some adversity to get through right off this.
That's right. So that helps us understand how serious the moment was. The family had already lost Wilbur, and then they lost the old store itself. But the story did not end there. By August 1964, 8 months later, Harris Drug Store had reopened in a new building. This was more than replacing what had burned. The new building created the Harris Drug Store that is still there today. The prescription department, the soda fountain counter, and the basic layout that generations of people have known ever since. So Mike and Lisa, what did the new building mean to the family and to Greenville?
I guess a new beginning into a more modern, be able to offer more. There was, the jewelry cases were there, the soda fountain was new, stuff like that, offer new products. I guess his pharmacy was changing more into things already prepared. There was more room for stock stuff and carrying more products.
Lisa?
And I think the rebuild just showed the community, the commitment that the family had just to remain and to keep it going and to serve the area.
Thank you. You just stole my thunder because I was about to say the rebuilding says a lot. It showed that the family was staying and that the Harris Drug Store still had a future in Greenville. And we're all so happy about that. So that future would depend heavily on Harold Harris, affectionately known as Gussie. Gussie was still a young man, and he stepped into a responsibility that was larger than just a job. So when we talk about Gussie's place in this story, we are talking about someone who helped carry Harris Drug Store from a very difficult period into the modern era. Mike and Lisa, what did it mean for your father to come back into the business at that point in his life?
I'm sure it wasn't exactly the way he wanted it, to be thrust into that and to deal with those things. I'm sure he wanted to come back and ease into it and work with his father and then build things. But it was the way it was, and he jumped in and worked with my grandmother and made it work. And that's what they did.
And I think the fact that the fire occurred and they rebuilt, it was just almost like a fresh start in, a new beginning to a modern time. So it's in a way a certain break from the past, the way pharmacy had been. My dad was fresh out of pharmacy school, and I wanted to.
Yeah, that gives us a sense of the responsibility he stepped into and how much of his life became tied to the store. Now I'd like to talk about Gussie not just as the next pharmacist, but as the person so many here remember. For more than 50 years, he was part of daily life at Harris Drug Store. But he was more than just a pharmacist behind a counter. He was a businessman, a sports fan, a golfer, a Red Sox supporter, and someone who clearly enjoyed people. This is one of the places where I really want Mike and Lisa to help us understand the person behind the counter. So what should people remember about your dad?
That he was caring, he was honest, he would do whatever a person would need for him. And stuff like that. He was always trying to be there, to do whatever he could, and stuff like that.
Yeah, and my dad, he never had a bad word to say about it. Never judged people. He met them where they were. And, he was committed to the community. He was in Kiwanis, he was in the rec department, he was on the school board, and just whatever he could get involved with to help in this community. And I think families that have been here a long time understand that connection that all families had to each other to make a go of it here. And he was, very generous, funny. He loved to bring chocolate to people because he had a wicked sweet tooth.
Tell us about his sense of humor. We have heard a lot about that in the last week or two.
Right.
I don't remember that as much growing up. I don't remember he was more, of course, when I saw him at work, he was always more serious, so I didn't remember him joking around. And at home, I'm sure I was doing something I wasn't supposed to, so I was in that part. But I remember after he got the encephalitis and he got sick, then his personality changed and he was a lot more joking and funny. And I remember that part of him much more. Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely true after his illness. I think it changed how I looked at life, and he liked to joke and make people laugh, and, have a lot of fun.
Thank you. So that gives us a fuller picture of Gussie, not just as a third generation pharmacist, but as a person people knew, trusted, and enjoyed. So one place where many people made their own Harris Drugstore memories was at the soda fountain. The soda fountain was introduced in 1949, and after the 1964 rebuilding, it became part of the Harris Drugstore that generations of people remember. For a lot of people, this is where Harris Drugstore becomes personal memory. So Mike and Lisa, why do you think people remember the soda fountain so strong?
I just think it brings them back to a time of an easier life, or when they were up here visiting, or as kids stopping in to get soda or an ice cream. And it just brings back the memories. Because I hear it every day. People will come in, I've never seen, they'll bring their family in. This is the way it used to be. Things aren't like this anymore. We used to have one of these in our town. And people say, I've never seen anything like this. And it just brings back memories of people and a better and easier time for them.
Yeah, that's very true. I hear that all the time also. People will come in and say, oh my God, this takes me back like 50 years. We used to have a soda fountain in pharmacy in my hometown. And, the soda fountain, you go there for a treat. So that's a happy memory. And people love to relive that. And they love to bring their kids in and show them what the soda fountain is all about. Yeah, all the time.
So just quickly, how many here have sat at that soda fountain? Okay, that tells us everything right there. That tells us something very important, actually. People remember the store not only because of prescriptions or shopping, but because of moments like that. The Harris family also had another place people connected with in Greenville. In July of 1952, the Frosteeland Dairy Bar gave the Harris family the story Summerside. The drugstore was part of everyday downtown life, but the dairy bar was tied to the warm weather, ice cream, families, teenagers, tours, and evenings in town. For many people, Frosteeland was one of those places that meant summer in Greenville. So Mike and Lisa, what are your earliest memories of Frosteeland?
Mine was, like I said, my grandmother would babysit us, we'd go down and we'd hang out the dairy bar. And like I said, the girls were basically our babysitters there for a while. But I'd just sit at the window on a stool and just watch things go on. And I do remember that back then, they would have you have the milk thing up there. My father would have to go down and he'd have to mix the ice cream. And I remember watching him do that.
Yeah, I don't remember so much being babysat at the drugstore, but I know there are some people here that were not babysitters. But
Why you screwed up so much?
yes, I did that for work getting in the dairy bar. As soon as I was old enough to get in there and start rolling ice cream. I was all over it, and every summer, that's what I did. In high school was working at the dairy bar. And my grandmother and my father were two of the best customers at the dairy. And his own flowers.
What was your father's favorite thing?
Do you remember, they actually used to have a little sign on the dairy bar, they call it the Gussie, and it was his regular order. It was like a cheeseburger, a hot dog, French fries, and whatever he had on his cheeseburger. I can't remember now, but I don't know if anybody out there remembers. You guys recognize. Oh, you that on the side? Okay. I wondered what happened to this. Yeah, and I remember my grandmother always, that was like her dinner almost every night.
It's a burger and cheeseburger with mustard.
And she always had fried onions.
It's
The fried onions, yeah, so.
Thanks. So that picture in the middle, the Harrises took that out at the end of the first season. And the ladies are Liz Ritchie, or Liz Nealing at the time. In the middle is Virginia Richards. And then is Arlene Harris, Gussie's sister. So I guess the family was putting to work. So what helps separate Frosteeland from the drugstore? It was part of the same family story, but it had its own feel and its own memories. Another part of the family business story came through Carol. Carol and Gussie met in Boston, where they married in 1963. And that same year, they moved back to Greenville. For the next 20 years, Carol was part of the Harris family story in a way that may not have been with a store name attached to it, but it still mattered. She and Gussie were raising Mike and Lisa, building life here, and being part of the daily rhythm of the family, the store, and the community. Then in 1983, Carol opened the corner shop. That gave Carol her own chapter in the downtown business story. It was another Harris family business, but it was also very much Carol's place. Mike and Lisa, what did your mother bring to the family businesses?
I just remember when he first bought it. I think the first year ago, it was like a co-op. It was like people would sell their own stuff there. And then must have been after I went off to college or around that time. I know I worked over there for a summer, and there was not very much there. And I just remember pretty much for the summer sitting by the window on Preston Ave and just looking out because it wasn't busy or anything. And I think my grandmother said something to the effect, "You're gonna have to sell a lot of postcards, not ready for that." I said it to my mother, which was, I don't think, very well received. So when I came back when I was going to college is when it all changed. My mother became more involved because I wasn't there anymore. Lisa was more in high school, and that's when she got more involved and tried the gift shows and started buying stuff and what it is today. And so,
Yeah, and I think part of mom's getting involved in it and getting seriously involved in it and running the business was when my dad got so sick. She didn't know if pharmacy was going to continue, what was going to happen to her. So she started really working hard with the home shop to make that successful. And I do remember her saying something about at the beginning, she first started buying. My father told her, she was going to go to her first gift show, and Dad said, "Okay, we've got a budget, $200. Go for it." So, but yeah, she worked incredibly hard. But both my parents always did, and my shop's been going for a few years too.
What do you think people remember about your mom?
that she was caring. She was involved. She was on the school board. She was very caring and involved with the church. It was in numerous groups.
Hospital auxiliary. I don't know how many raffle tickets I sold.
She worked on the ambulance.
Yeah, she worked on the ambulance. She, was accepted by the community. She was from away, city girl, Gus brought back city girl. To Greenville, but she was accepted. And she joined her. I think she did do Steve 12, yeah. So.
Did she start the fudge or did you?
She started the fudge.
A good tradition. So that gives Carol her own place in the story, not only as Gussie's wife and Mike and Lisa's mother, but as someone who helped shape the family's downtown business presence herself. So Carol's story brings us naturally to the children she and Gussie raised here, Mike and Lisa. Lisa, you grew up with this family business story all around you. Harris Drug Store, Frosteeland, the corner shop, and the daily life of downtown Greenville. Like many people from small towns, you left for a time, but you chose to come back to Greenville and continue the family's downtown business presence in your own way. So what brought you back home?
Just sitting in traffic in Boston one day. I was growing up in high school. I was out of here, like a lot of kids. Gotta go see what's going on in the big world. And I did not ever think that I would be coming back to live in Greenville after I went off to college. But like I said, I did work in Boston, I think for 5 or 6 years after college. And I just said, this is crazy.
When you came back, did you have a plan of joining the family legacy? Or?
No plan. I just, I feel so fortunate that there was always work and family business. So that's what I did. I jumped in and did whatever.
Well, it shows that legacy is not automatic. Each generation has to decide what to carry forward and how to make it their own. So Lisa's path continued the downtown business store in one way. Mike's path took him behind the pharmacy counter. So Mike, your path was totally different than Lisa's. You became the 4th generation of a Harris pharmacist after Isaac, Wilbur, and Gussie. By the time you joined the business, Harris Drug was already nearly a century old. That is a lot of family history to deal with. And you stepped into it at a time when pharmacy itself was changing quickly. So Mike, did you ever seriously think of doing anything else other than pharmacy?
No, that's all I knew and that's all I enjoyed and had seen. I never thought of anything else. I had no clue if I wanted to do anything else, but that's what I wanted to do, and this is where I wanted to be.
You went to Northeastern, right?
I did.
Had your dad become sick yet?
Yeah, he became sick I graduated in '83 from high school, and it was my senior year that February. So
did you know when you went to school that you would probably be coming back here?
that was part of my intention, unless something had changed along the lines. But that was always my goal, my I saw it.
Well, that gives us a great sense of what it means to inherit not just a business, but a responsibility. And that responsibility has changed a great deal over time. My favorite picture. Every generation of the Harris family had to adapt. Isaac's pharmacy in 1896 was very different from Wilbur's, Gussie's, and Michael's. Today, an independent pharmacy has to deal with insurance, regulations, technology, competition, and pressures that earlier generations could not have imagined. But even with all those changes, people still need to trust the person behind the counter. So Mike, what has changed the most about pharmacy during your career?
Of course, technology has changed so much. Once I went away to school and got to use a computer, I told my father, I'm not coming back unless we buy a computer. We didn't have a computer system. So I was not a very good typer, and I was not going to type and roll those labels and do things 5 or 6 times because I kept making errors. So that had changed. It had gone more from compounding in liquids to a lot more pills. And so that part of it had changed. And insurance, it went from cash to insurance. And I just remember at that time, people would have a little credit card for their insurance, and you slide it like on those little credit card things, and you mail those in, and then you get your pay back. Now everything is all computerized and it's instantaneous. It's just like that.
Lisa brought in a few things to show that deal with the pharmacy. Why don't you explain to us what they are?
This was one thing that Luke posed the question about. We think about the drugstore, what comes to mind? And it's these things, which despite all the changes that have come in pharmacy, these still remain, and it's about as low tech as you can get. I always saw my dad using it, my brother uses it every day. It's the pill tray. So the pharmacist takes their pill, bottle of pills, dumps them onto the tray, counts them out into this side that has the little cap, and this little end funnels the pills that go back into the original bottle, and the pills that go into the person's prescription go to the side and then into their bottle that gets dispensed. So that's the tray, and this is the spatula. So every day, 2, 4, 6,
Oh my God.
5, 10. So it just occurred to me the other day when I was thinking about this whole presentation, this.
Yeah.
It's about, like I said, it's about as low tech as you can get, and it's something my father used all the time, and my brother continues to use every day.
That's a great story. Mike, what's it like being an independent pharmacist today?
I like it because I have a lot of freedom. I don't have to answer to anyone. If I wanted, maybe not at the moment, but maybe the long not that I ought to pay attention until it's too late. But I can. It doesn't need to be done this way. If I feel like I can get away doing it that way, make it better. If I'm having a problem with insurance or something, I'm just gonna give. If I know the person and they're in town, here you can have it. We'll figure it out later. I don't have to answer to that part of it. You want to charge it or pay me later? I have that flexibility. Things I don't like. I don't like being on the phone all day. I don't like dealing with insurance companies.
That's a bit.
Yeah.
It used to be I can call the doctor and I used to get an MA over there. No problem. I can get things changed. But now it's gone over there. I have to leave a message. It's stuff like that. I mean, technology's made it better, but it's also made it more difficult in some things.
I imagine it gets tougher every year.
It does.
So that helps people understand that the store may look familiar, but the work behind the counter has changed tremendously. So after all that change, I want to ask about what has stayed the same. The Harris story keeps coming back to a few things that seem not to change: trust, service, hard work, and showing up for the community. So Mike and Lisa, what do you think has stayed the same from one generation to the next?
I would say dedication, commitment, the way we feel about the community. Always trying to be there, always trying to be helpful, be considerate, honest, try to work with people.
I would agree. I look at it as when you have a pharmacy, you are making a commitment to the community. And people, come into the pharmacy for all kinds of reasons, but a lot of the time, they're not well. And and try and be sympathetic and helpful and serve them, especially that. And I think, I don't know if you showed, did you show this picture at the beginning?
Yes, at the beginning.
I found this picture, which Luke did have a slide of earlier with my great-grandfather, I.A. Harris, first registered pharmacist to settle in Greenville, 1896, still on the job inside. And I look at that, nailed it, that's it, still on the job. There, day after day, to help people out.
So that feels like the thread running through this whole story. Different generations, different businesses, different times, but the same basic responsibility to people. And that brings us to the question I wanted to save for last. We've covered a lot of ground this afternoon. Isaac and Nora, Wilbur and Ida, Gussie and Carol, and Mike and Lisa. We've talked about Harris Drug, the soda fountain, Frosteeland, the corner shop, the 1963 fire, the 1964 rebuilding, pharmacy, downtown Greenville, and family life. So I want to end the formal part of our conversation with this. Mike and Lisa, when people leave here today, what do you hope they remember about the Harris family?
Just, I would say our commitment to the community in the town of Greenville. And we'll always try to be there for you and we'll work with you.
So what's that mean, though? You told me that, I asked you what it means, and then you blew me away. So
Yeah.
tell the audience what that means.
Well, if I'm gonna do whatever I can to help you, if you need to call me at home and I need to come on over, I've done that. If it means I may run something up to the hospital because they don't have it, or if I have to run something, I don't know, I've run up to Beaver Cove, or I've gone up, up past Wilson Pond to deliver something, or some people, I can't be there until 7. Well, they got stuff to do. I'll hang out or I'll come back on over, stuff like that.
So for 130 years, how many days have you been?
I'll close
Those
4 days a year.
Exactly. 4 days a year.
I mean, there was a time when Michael was the only pharmacist, and he was there every day.
I just couldn't believe that. They're closed 4 days a year. And I asked Mike, why? And he said, well, if somebody's sick on a Sunday or gets in an accident and they need medicine, we have to be there. And that's when I just said, this story is unbelievable, what this family has done for this community over 130 years. And that's why I saved that question last, because that commitment is just extraordinary. So,
And,
I'm supposed to let you answer the questions, not me.
but it was bad when I read about my great-grandfather, my dad. And what Michael has to say, that we would have it any other way. I mean, that's what it meant to be here, to have, my dad considered himself very lucky to have the pharmacy and to be able to serve Greenville.
Well, we're the lucky ones. So, thank you so much. And I think if you don't mind, we'll let the audience ask questions or tell memories or.
I do have to ask Bill Squires to tell a little story about my dad that will address his great sense of humor. And Bill and my dad were in high school together, graduated together. And I think, were you valedictorian, Bill?
Pardon?
Were you the valedictorian?
No.
So yeah, I'll bring the mic to you and you can tell us story about the senior discount at the drugstore. It's,
Well,
I'm pretty loud. Gussie and I were best of friends. We always kept everything light. And Gussie was a very loose guy, you know, like walk along, you think you're gonna fall all apart. We kept things light. And I don't know if they're on anymore, but when I turned 55 or the age where you might get discount, I showed up at this dairy bar one night and I said, Gussie, you get a discount on this stuff? And he says, yeah, but you have to be 90.
Other memories? We'd love to have people share or ask questions. Jerry Ann?
Spirit. I was born in 1963, so I'm just a little bit older than Michael. And my first story has to do with their grandmother, Ida. I was 10 years old and I used to sell door to door the TV guide. Remember that TV guide? Oh, and even in the winter, I lived on Spruce Street and I had to go all over town, walk, no rides, cold weather. And every time I went down to the drugstore, Ida would be at the counter, hanging over the counter like she did, and always gave me a cup of hot cocoa. She was very sweet, but I was naughty one day. There was a peanut butter cup, a tiny little one, sitting there, and I really wanted one, but I didn't really have any money because my mom counted all the money after I got back. But Ida moved around to the other side, turned backwards, and I took the peanut butter cup. And I ate it on the way home. It was freezing. When I got home, I emptied my pockets of the money and that little foil peanut butter cup thing was there. And my mother said, where'd you get that? And I said, the drugstore. She goes, did you pay for it? I said, no. She said, get your coat on and your shoes and march yourself right back down there. And she called Ida and told her I was coming. And when I got there, I had been crying the whole way because I knew I was in trouble. And I used to think Ida was very stern. So when I walked in there, she told me to sit down. What did you do? And I said, I stole a peanut butter. And back then it was like 2 cents. And she said, why did you do that? I said, because I wanted it. And she said, all you had to do is ask and I would have given it to you. She goes, you don't have to do that ever again, okay? And I said, yes. From now on moving forward, every time I went in, she would put one on that. So that was very sweet. And then later on, when Gussie got sick, and I worked at the hospital for years and saw Gussie every day because some of you may or may not know that Mike and Gussie came to the hospital multiple times, at least twice a day, to fill our med cards and get us medications when we didn't have them. And Gussie would come in all the time, but he was very quiet. But after he was sick, his personality changed a little. He was more open and he was more jovial. And to me, I was shocked because I didn't really talk much. One day I came to the store and he handed me a box of chocolates, chocolate store. And I go, for me? He goes, no. I go, what are they for? He said, take him over to the hospital. And for years, he would always bring chocolates to the residents in both sides, and Mike and them still do that. And then I used to joke on him when he'd say, bring it to the hospital. I'd say, how old are those? That said, past day, due date. So it was pretty funny. Mike and I worked for years in the pharmacy, and I was always calling him, and I'd say, Mike, he'd say, Jerry Ann, I go, I need your help. And he said, I'd be right over. So the commitment that this pharmacy has done for years is just ongoing and just never ended. And if any of you have lived in other states or other cities, getting medications, figuring things out is not easy. Here, it's so personal. They take good care of everybody. Lisa and I are on the Historical Society board together, so we work closely, and she and Mike went to school with my brother and Lisa with my sister. So I thank you so much for everything the family's done. And by the way, when I saw his mom and the sisters would come from Boston, they would come to church. I used to just think they were the most beautiful women I'd ever seen. They were, so thank you.
So when you do 4 generations, there's so much you have to cut out. And one of the things I cut out was Lisa played on a gold ball championship basketball team. And if you Google Lisa Harris in the 80s, she comes up as the one of the dominant players on that team, right? Yes. Yes, Luke. You want the microphone? Oh, you need to stand up and face the audience. Yes.
So I went to the drugstore and was purchasing an allergy medicine that is controlled. And so when I was going to the checkout, seeing this controlled medication, Claritin D. And they said, I need to see your license, right in there first. And I'm like, Lisa, what license? But even there was just like looking at us. But she was very professional and made me go get my license.
Yes.
Name's Betty. I'm born in 1950, so yeah, I'm old. And I remember the old store. It must have been, it's in on the lake side, in the corner were a couple of booths where the teenagers had come and hang out. And across from that is the books. And my friend Jackie and I would flash our and since we had, and we go down, sit on the floor, read about 6 or 7 comic books and buy one. And they never gave us the furniture. They let us have access to that stuff. And what? I remember when Gus Brown would have been 11. I remember, was the fire at Belmontsburg?
No, that was a different thought.
I remember mostly Belmont's corner where the corner bookstore is burned. That was awful. But those things, as I was a kid, I remember it and how awful I felt for the community. For the big so I don't remember when Carol first came with Gussie to Greenville. I was a young teen. I was at the movie theater, at a movie theater. And Gus came in with this gorgeous, tall, slender, very blonde, classy woman. And I thought, what was with Gussie? And like everybody remembers, they were so accommodating, never got scolded. I was always in the first. I lived on Lower Pleasant Street, so it's about stupid jobs for me to go to the restaurant. And a lot. It's getting just so important. That's it. And Gussie. Oh, and was it our 150th town anniversary? And Gussie was our mayor.
That's right.
And he had such fun, and we had fun calling him mayor.
Thanks, Betty.
I just want to add, as much as our family, yes, Terry, I hear, but as much as our family has been dedicated to Greenville, when my dad got sick, the community really rallied around him. And I was a freshman in high school at the time, and I was just, really made an impression. I mean, I think the Bartleys practically adopted my brother and I. They could have us over for dinner. People would bring food. Just so much support was shown to my parents during that whole thing, and it really meant a lot.
Thanks, Lisa. Did anybody else want to add anything? Woody?
That's essential. I'm Woody Bartman. For years, I was an electrician. Took a job with a water company back in 2004, but I never seemed to be able to shake one customer. I was the official electrician for Harris Drug to this day. No, it's true. But it was around 2010, somewhere in there. It had a break broken, a window upstairs. Yeah, Gussie called and said, "Can you come over for a minute? I want to close." So I did, and I went out back, upstairs, he described it. He wanted me to wire up, electrify this grid on the floor, at the second floor, and you're serious. And he was. We convinced him that updating the burglar alarm system might be a better.
Anybody else? Well, I hope you've enjoyed this. I know for me, to be able to learn about our families is so enriching, and the legacies that this area has in all of our families is just amazing. And to kick it off